Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do What You Do. I'm turning up my volume because I keep forgetting to do that right before I turn it on. But last time we were talking about personality tests, and we're going to take up on that. In personality tests, the object of personality tests is to obtain a fairly clear picture of the feelings and attitudes clients have about themselves, other people, and the world at large. Because this is a big teller of the mindset, okay? How you feel about yourself, how you feel about others, and how you feel about the world at large. Now, again, there's always situational issues that might pop up, like, we got going on here. I'm not too happy about what's going on in the USA right now, and a whole lot of us are not. There are two different types of personality tests. Number one, the projective tests, and number two, the self-report inventories. And that's the kind that you're most likely going to take if you take a test at a psychologist or counselor's office. Projective tests are the least structured of the two. And so those are the ones that, can, be more loosely interpreted sometimes by therapists who, have their own biases going on. In projective tests, the possible answers are quite numerous. The goal being that unconscious fantasies and other private material will surface in the client's response. And that's why they have these tests now when you apply for jobs. They have like these little questions that are basically a psych test. And then sometimes in social media, I notice it looks like in social media somebody's psych testing us sometimes. They're asking you these questions and you're like, oh, well, sometimes you'll say stuff, but then if you're in a mood, you might say, the worst thing you could possibly think of or whatever, because you're like, why are you doing this, people? But, projective tests. The basic idea behind this form is that when people are asked questions that have no clear-cut right or wrong answer, they will generally respond according to their own personality, and that's the teller. That is, their answers will reflect certain characteristics that are a fundamental part of these people. And I met with an ex several years ago, many years ago at this point, and he wanted to talk. He thought maybe we had something in common, and he wanted to talk about it. And so, I asked him only a few questions. He did most of the talking, which that tells you something right there. If the other person is talking about themselves constantly, well, that could be the sign of a narcissistic person, a little bit of megalomania there. But they were making statements like, well, we don't have to just because we used to, and, you're thinking, well, they're hesitant, and then they're like, they don't want, we don't have to jump into anything, and, I don't necessarily want to get, so then they're telling you they're afraid of commitment, so people tell you things without telling you things, when you study psychology, that's one of the things you learn is inference. You can read into what this person is saying, what you say isn't always what you're actually saying to people, so, projective tests force clients to deal with ambiguous situations, so their responses are assumed to be fairly representative of their overall behavior. And that's what I say, believe what people tell you about themselves. Because anyone can say anything, but if someone tells you something and it's a negative thing, believe that. Because most people don't say negative things about themselves if it's not true. So there are some people with false modesty and all that, but and always remember that actions speak louder than words. Watch how someone behaves. Someone could say they're the greatest person ever, but if they're behaving like then they're not. So, Essentially, the way clients respond to the test is another indication of how they think and feel. So, the things you're putting out there are representative of your internal dialogue. The clinician gets two views at once: the answer to the test and whatever behavior is exhibited with that answer. Because, people who have a negative outlook are going to say more negative things. People who have a positive outlook are going to say more positive things. Someone with low self-esteem is going to say self-debasing things sometimes. It just depends. So, these are a good way for a clinician to get a picture of what's going on inside of you, especially if they feel like you're blocking or not even aware of your own feelings. Several different tests have developed from this idea, but the two primary ones are the Rorschach test, we all know that is the inkblot test, and the thematic apperception test. The Rorschach test, which asks the client to describe in detail what each of 10 different inkblots looks like, was devised by Swiss psychiatrist Hermann Rorschach. I took a Rorschach test years ago. When I was just a kid in, 8th grade, my parents were just sure I was retarded. So, my mother said I could be tested. She got surprised because I had an IQ of 122 and they recommended that I skip a grade, which she wasn't for that for me. So there we are. While responses to the inkblots alone cannot in any way yield a full diagnosis, they may provide insight into certain aspects of the client's personality. Again, like I say, their mindset, the way they think. Guidelines for interpreting the client's response, such as the Beck method, have been developed, and research has indicated that they improve inner judge reliability, because that's going to give them a picture of what's going on inside of the person and the way they think. And of course, the problem with all of these tests could be that people lie. So, in the more structured test, the client must make up a story for each of up to 30 different pictures that show one or more people doing something. And I know we took this back in school too. These cards are less ambiguous than the Rorschach inkblots because their content guides the person in a general direction. For instance, a card showing the faces of two women could hardly be described as two bugs biting each other, which is how one of the inkblots was described. And if you have a client and you're showing two women's faces and they say it's two bugs biting each other, then you know there's a serious problem going on there. Yet there is still opportunity for the client to project, hence the name Projective Personal Views onto the scene. The women could be talking or arguing or plotting, for example, which a more paranoid person might believe. Another modification, the cat, is especially for children. However, the major factor is the clinician's interpretation of the responses. This is not an easy task, and that's why it requires the education to do so. Years ago, I was in a healing center, and there was a woman who just decided one day, because I was being a life coach, that she wanted to be a life coach too. And she wanted to come into my office and take my information. I said, no, you're not. She goes, well, so-and-so's the boss here. So she said, I can do what I want. And I said, no, I am a private contractor. That is my material. That is my, mental property. And if you take that, I'm going to sue you because that's mine. But she just decided, with no training, no education, that she could do this. And that's why I have a problem with some people who are life coaches. Like, she had lost a lot of weight, so I would trust her to be a weight loss coach. But as far as helping people with mental health issues, no. And so, that's something to remember. You need to go to somebody who has got education, got training, and knows what they're doing. You can't just, walk into somebody whose background was business and now they're doing this, because there's a few of those out there. And it's like, but you don't have any education in, mental and personality ways of being. You don't know anything about that. So, yeah, I'd not bother. Clinical psychologists need several years of training before they can correctly interpret projective test data, and even then, they subjective feelings and thoughts can influence the interpretation. And I've been to a couple of therapists who had bad attitudes. I told two of them I would not go see them anymore. If they could refer me to someone else, I would appreciate it. Because, your therapist is supposed to help you, not supposed to drag you down. Now, if you're a negative person, you might enjoy a negative therapist. Y'all can sit there and gripe about stuff all day long. But that's not what I wanted. I wanted to get well and move on with my life. So I finally found someone who helped me to do that. So that is important for you to do, is to, find someone who is going to help you, not, make your life worse. Nevertheless, these tests are still fairly popular. And that's because, like I said, if therapist thinks you're blocking or not telling them everything, these can give them an insight into, what's going on inside of you. So if a therapist asks you to take them, just take them. It's only going to be good for you. Self-report inventories. These tests collect the same basic descriptive information, but they ask the client to do the assessing. And a lot more people are comfortable with that. They don't feel judged. They feel like they're giving you this information so you can help them. And I know that's what I appreciate is, I don't like to be judged. I like for me to tell you, hey, here's a problem, or maybe, you can figure out a problem by looking at this, So, I appreciate those a little bit more. Many of the questions asked about the client require only a yes or no answer. So, it's not a big convoluted thing where you got to say what something looks like or what you think it's up to. It's just yes or no. The self-assessment psychological inventory, which asks people to evaluate their emotional status. Clearly, this type of self-inventory requires honest answers, as even scrupulously honest people can be too self-critical, yielding a negative assessment. And a lot of people, like I said, especially if they have low self-esteem, they might be too self-critical and put themselves down and rate themselves pretty low. That is supposed to give the clinician a way to help you, but again, if you're trying to be too modest or whatever, it might give them an idea that you need something you don't. So if you're taking psych tests or going to your therapist, be honest, 100% honest, because they're there to help you. And that's why you went to them to begin with, was to get some help. So playing silly little games is just dumb on your behalf. It's a waste of your time and money. One of the most widely used inventories is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, or the MMPI. And most of the professionals that I worked with, that's one of them they use. Developed by Hathaway and McKinley. It lists almost 600 statements that the client can categorize as true, false, or cannot say, depending on how they feel the statements fit their own behavior. And I had a few, like I said, I took some tests for a place I worked with at one point. And, so sometimes there's questions and I'm like, I have no idea, because I've never had that problem or exhibited that behavior or thought that. So I was like, I don't know. A major problem with self-report inventories is that people can either lie about themselves or simply not be aware of their true state. And, I've seen people that, are both like that. There are people who are pathological liars, and really, if you're going in and taking a psych test and you're going to lie on it, you're only hurting yourself. You're only hurting yourself, because then they can't really help you with what's really going on. But so many times, pathological liars are also manipulators and narcissistic sociopaths. So, they may admit there's some problem and their family says there's a problem, so they go ahead and go to therapy, but they have no interest in getting well because they enjoy being how they are. So, okay. Okay, my son came in. In response, the MMPI has attempted to deal with the problem by incorporating 3 control scales. That is, 3 distinct sets of questions that will clearly indicate basic discrepancies in the answers. So yes, there's some trick questions on these tests. But, that's to help them know whether you're being honest or not. There is, in fact, strong empirical support backing the MMPI as an effective classifier of personality characteristics. So again, if someone suggests you take this test, just take it. They're trying to figure out what's going on inside of you, what, your mindset is, and then they know, have a better picture. Because like I say, some people go to therapy and they're just so poof, they don't know what they need. They don't know what's going on. They just know this is the way I feel. So, when the therapist asks you to take this, just take it and be perfectly honest, The Q-sort test, developed by Butler and Haig, tries to ascertain the client's self-concept through the self-report format. Specifically, it tries to obtain a description of the client's idea of both the real self and the ideal self. And we all have an ideal self. The person we want to be or aspire to be someday. And then we have the real self, who we are right now. And there should be, as close a match as possible. But there's going to be some discrepancies. Carl Rogers, a humanist clinician, reported that the difference between the real and ideal generally lessened as therapy progressed. So, again, that's a good reason to go to therapy. If you are this type of person and you want to be this type of person, and there is a big gap between those two, therapy can help you lessen that gap and become the person you want to be. Therefore, repeated use of the Q-sort can be valuable. And that's, a good way for them to figure out if you're progressing, if you're making any headway in therapy. It's like when I went to therapy, and I was in 2 groups, and finally the lady says, I feel like we're beating the proverbial dead horse here. We just keep going over stuff. And this is as good as it's gonna get. You were severely traumatized, and we've done the best we can. You've overcome as much as you can. I'm gonna exit you because I don't think there's any use in coming in rehashing and beating the proverbial dead horse. So just go out and do your best and have a good life. So sometimes people are just like, but I want it to be better. And sometimes, if you live through severe trauma or have a serious mental illness, there's a point where that's as good as it's going to get. So you have to be able to accept that, and get on with your life. Intelligence tests. These tests measure the client's intelligence quotient, or IQ. Last measurement, mine was 135. My son, my youngest, had to take one for work here recently, and he got a 128, which is way up from where he was, so that's good. I'm proud of him. He's been reading and learning. They are used primarily to determine the presence and degree of intellectual dysfunction. I got an intellectual dysfunction of the tongue. You might notice. Especially mental retardation. Other disorders, however, are also characterized by deteriorated cognitive functioning. Schizophrenia, for instance, causes a decline in the ability to reason and problem solve, as was the case with Arnold. And there are people who have problems reasoning and problem solving, and that can be a serious problem in your life. If you can't solve problems and you can't reason things out, that is going to hold you back in life. Arnold's reduced cognitive functioning and some of his idiosyncratic ideas would be revealed in his answers to intelligence test items. Deteriorated cognitive functioning is a symptom of autism as well, but severely autistic children like Tommy are untestable. There are two major intelligence tests, the Stanford-Binet Intelligence Scale and the Welsher Intelligence Scales, which is the one that I see used the most. Each has a different version of children and adults, for children and adults, and the Welsher now offers special tests for the elderly and for very young, because some elder people are going to know things that some younger people won't. And, there's a difference, and very young kids aren't able to answer some of the questions like an older child could. So, like I say, in psychology, with everything, as with everything else, there's always fine-tuning going on. And that should be. Everything should be always getting fine-tuned so it can become better. Anything that's locked and stagnant is not coming better. The Stanford-Binet Intelligence Scale. This is based on the early work of Alfred Binet, French psychologist who originally devised the test as a way to distinguish mentally retarded children. Louis Terman of Stanford University has revised it to yield results at the opposite end of the spectrum. So he's looking for, geniuses and uber geniuses. After extensive field trials in the schools, the concept of mental age, or MA, has been established. Simply stated, this means that a person who functions intellectually at the age of most 12-year-olds has a mental age of 12, even if the person's chronological age is higher or lower. And there are people in the world today who probably don't even have a mental age of 12, but they're an adult. So, that's a shame, but, it's a fact. The education systems are not what they should be, and there are folks who, are very mentally young and gullible, and, that's a shame. According to this scale, the person has a chronological age, which may be higher or lower. According to the scale, a person's IQ can be determined by the following formula. You take their IQ score, and then you have the mental age over the chronological age times 100, and that's, where the person, is on the intelligence scale. So, it's a little more complicated than if you just took the intelligence test and they said, oh, your IQ is 1 whatever. Then they can further take your mental age based on some of the answers and your chronological age and come up with another rating. And that tells where you fall in, the rating. And there's a whole lot of people who don't have a lot of common sense. And that can nowadays also be measured. So you might be a 50-year-old person and have a chronological age of 12 or 10. Which, like I said, a little too many people in the world for my comfort that got that going on. But everybody is different. And just because you have a low IQ doesn't mean you can't have a fulfilling life. There are people I know who were not super smart, had, low education levels, but they were some of the most commonly, sensible people that I've ever met in my life. I say, my grandmother, who did not have, there's a moth in here, who did not have a high level of education, was probably the best psychologist I ever met, because she had an understanding of how people's minds work, how, they are inside, and she could, give you advice that, would actually be helpful, and, she had great insight and great common sense. So, everybody's different, and just because you're, not smart doesn't mean you're dumb, and just because you're dumb doesn't mean you're not smart. So, the things weigh out, and, but my advice also is to learn everything you can. Why not? Because it's been proven that if you keep learning everything you can, you stay mentally sharp. And that's the number one problem with our elders, is that they have cognitive decline along with the physical decline. And that also is a problem, when they start getting forgetful and, can't reason and things like that. So, learn all you can. Be as intelligent you can. As like Paul said in the Bible, I would not have you be ignorant. And I don't want you to be either. So, that's where I'm going to leave you for today. I hope this helped you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. Please like and share this educational program, and that's what it is, an educational program. It's not designed to treat any mental illness. If you feel like anything has triggered you or is a problem in your life, then by all means contact your mental health professional. Like I said, share it, spread it around the world. If you want to help me out, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to help me out even more, go to my Patreon page and become a patron. The link to that is in the posts. Thanks for watching or listening. That's all for now. Until next time.